I was recently watching Ron Paul's Liberty Report. The most recent episode is Abolish the Fed's Monopoly on Money, or the Fed's Money Monopoly. And I was thinking, what are the pros of competing currencies and what are the cons? So I'm thinking one pro of competing currencies would be that if one crashes, like the dollar is likely to crash eventually, we're backing it on petrol, which is a commodity that's value is going down every single year. Then we would have another currency to kind of pick up the slack. Or maybe a couple currencies in case more than one ends up crashing. And of course, silver and gold have held their value pretty well historically. So it would be good to have some silver and gold currencies circulating that can kind of back up the currency we currently have or act as a backup for the currency we currently have, which is a fiat currency and a commodity-backed currency backed by petrol. Some of the cons of competing currencies, though, is that when the economy ends up falling down and the currency that most people are using crashes, people will just move over to the next currency, and that will leave a lot of people holding the bag with the currency that we were previously using. So, and it also would encourage speculators to come in and start stacking up currency, which we already have a problem with the dollar, as people essentially just take up more and more money and hoard it because it's currently worth a lot. But in the case of competing currencies, if people start stacking up more and more of a currency and start actually buying it using other currencies, the price of that currency would go up so high that, it would be worth a lot, but eventually people would not be able to use it anymore. Because nobody's going to spend let's say, California note that's worth $300,000 to buy a cheeseburger, or that's worth $1.35. And of course, businesses would have to be very wary about taking that money, because they'd have to make change for it. I also kind of worry that if we had competing currencies, that would mean that when you cross into another state, you would have to exchange the currency that you were using in your own state. And of course, states could charge exorbitant prices to actually exchange currencies. We see with North Korea and other countries that don't do too well, that even though their currency might be one thing when exchanged with a dollar or in other countries, when people try to exchange their currency and exchange a dollar in North Korea, they give them less than it's worth in their money. And I guess my fear is that states that aren't doing too well will do the same thing. So I'm in Connecticut. If I exchange Connecticut coin for a Mississippi note or Mississippi crown or something, then the state of Mississippi could decide, these banks here, they have the right to price gouge you for 25% of what your money's worth. And so, deal with it, bitch. And that would pretty much just be the way it is. And there's nothing you could do about it. And that really wouldn't work out too well for anyone, I don't think. Though I guess with the right controls, that could be avoided. Then, of course, there's the problem of who gets to produce their own currency. Is it just the states? Is it cities? Do the banks get to make their own currencies? And what's stopping any private institution that gets to compete with the Federal Reserve and produce their own currency from just creating a speculative currency and then starting movements to convince entire states to just buy up that currency, get everyone using it, and then as the price of it goes up, just sell it, just let it crash and leave everyone holding the bag while they run out the back door with all the money. Like, we see that with a lot of commodities that can become speculative bubbles, and money is no different. Bitcoin was a recent example of that. The price of Bitcoin initially, I think, was something like $100. But then the people who made it encouraged people to buy it up and to sell it. And people realized that they could sell it for more than they bought it for, because other people realized that they could sell it for more than they bought it for. So everyone just did that over and over again. And until the price rose so high that it couldn't sustain itself, and the investors holding it got scared and started dumping it. And now it's on the decline and falling rapidly. And a lot of people think it's eventually going to go back up, but the chances are it's not. And it might not drop to zero, but it will drop a lot. And yeah, it's probably not going to go back up to its original value, or its height value anyways, because it's a speculative bubble. And when bubbles burst, it usually takes a while for them to actually be built back up. Right now, the dollar isn't in a position to become a speculative bubble, because it's pretty much the only currency, the only thing that we have in this country to compare prices, to compare the worth of things, a measuring unit, basically. Nobody is going to turn the dollar into a speculative bubble, because the dollar is what things are worth. So you can't buy $1 for $1 today and sell it for $1,000 tomorrow, because it's the only currency you have. It's the only thing that you have to actually measure the worth of things. So its value will remain more or less constant. Whereas if you had competing currencies, now that dollar and all the other currencies could easily become speculative values. They could easily become things that get built up only to crash down later. And that could be bad for all of us in the long run. That said, a pro of that would be that if the dollar crashes, we're all going to be going down with it. Eventually the economy will stabilize, but it will stabilize at the bottom. Whereas if there are competing currencies, at least some people might get out of the eventual economic crash that comes from the petrodollar's collapse. It's more or less intact. They won't come out well off, but they'd come out fairly well if they had the foresight to buy into the currency that the states and municipalities were putting out. then of course I wonder if silver and gold actually do hold their value. What's stopping them from just becoming speculative bubbles? That's what happened during the Great Depression. Or rather, the Gilded Age that led to the Great Depression. And people bought up gold. And they kept selling it for higher prices and speculating on it until finally it collapsed. So, even the sound currency that Ron Paul is so keen on and has the potential to become a speculative currency and to collapse. It's not all that sound, really. And that, of course, is because it has no more intrinsic value than anything else. Value is determined by the people who value a thing. So gold, by the nature of value, simply can't have intrinsic value. It will always be subject to the laws of supply and demand. And if the demand for gold drops to nothing because it's become so expensive that nobody feels safe buying it as an investment, then the value of gold will not be intrinsically anything. It will be intrinsically nothing. So, the whole sound currency hypothesis doesn't really ring true for me, as far as a reason for having competing currencies. That said, I think it would be nice to have some local currencies, like things that you can use locally when bartering with the government. And I think that there should at least be fail-safe currencies in place in case the dollar crashes. But I don't think that it would be acceptable to have those spread all over where everyone's using them. And they're competing with the currency that is the central currency of our country. Ultimately, that will only drive down the value of the dollar further. And it will lead to economic crashes as these currencies that have the air of legitimacy because of their connection to local and state governments and become speculative bubbles that people start buying into in mass. Yeah, some of them might not collapse, some of them might not become bubbles, but there's a good chance that a lot of them will. As we've seen with Bitcoin, which was meant to be a currency, he actually cut into pieces and used to buy and sell things, but is now just a speculative bubble that people have built up, crashed, and are trying to build up again. I think that even if we get competing currencies, we still have to have the dollar as the base currency, the thing by which we determine the value of these new currencies. But then that would ultimately defeat the purpose of having the new currencies, because they would not be able to define values themselves. So yeah, those are my rambling thoughts on the idea of getting new currencies to compete with the Federal Reserve currency. Thanks for listening. This has been the Red Gladius. See ya.